Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Blue Veil Wellness Show. I am your host, Cristy Murray, Catholic nurse practitioner, and this is the show where we explore faith, food, and function because true wellness nourishes the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I'm so glad you're here today. And I'm glad you found this episode, and I hope it meets you right where you are. So when you're done watching, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what resonated, what questions came up for you, and we'll get back to you. There's some guests that come to this show where I can honestly say I've learned from this person long before they ever knew I existed. And Cynthia is one of those people. I've been following her work for years. I listen to her podcast. I pick up so much useful information from her show and her guests. And I share it with other people I work with, even with my patients. She is someone I deeply respect. And as a fellow nurse practitioner, as an educator, as a woman who has dedicated her career to helping other women understand their bodies. And to have her here today is really a great honor. And I know this conversation is going to be worth every minute of your time. We are going to talk about something that so many of my patients ask, this feeling of being off. I'm doing everything right, and my body is still not responding. Sleep is disrupted, energy is unpredictable. Weight is shifting in ways that don't make sense, even when they're in the gym all the time. And brain is not that quite sharp. So what my guest today is going to do is she's going to help us understand all these, and that much of it may be rooted in the gut. So not in a vague, trendy wellness way, but in a real evidence-based, here's what's actually happening way. And I'm so honored to welcome Cynthia Thurlow to the show.
Oh, Cristy, I'm so glad to be here with you today. Thanks for asking me to be a guest.
You're welcome. And so Cynthia is a nurse practitioner for over 25 years, clinical experience in health and wellness. She is the host of Everyday Wellness Podcast, an internationally recognized speaker, and the author of her new book, The Menopause Gut. So her mission is, you'll hear this in everything that she says, is to help women understand their bodies and thrive in perimenopause and beyond. So before we dive into all of it, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in your own words, Cynthia. Tell us who you are and what really brought you to this work.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to give everyone context. So I am a traditionally trained allopathic adult nurse practitioner, and I have been in the field for so long that in the 1990s, when acute care NP programs were really starting, I was told, honest to God, that it made more sense for me to do a primary care program than acute care medicine because there would, quote unquote, not be any nurse practitioners in hospitals. But the irony being, I never worked outside of the hospital. I did cardiology clinic. And so I was first an ER and trauma nurse in inner city Baltimore. I then kind of acquiesced over to clinical cardiology, where in our practice, NPs were incredibly autonomous. I was managing patients in the ICU. I was calling in choppers. I managed patients, from the ER to discharge. And I always credit the physicians that I worked with that they expected a lot of us. And I loved the intellectual rigor of being in cardiology. I love everything about the heart. I can assure you that the first couple of years I was a nurse practitioner, I was convinced I had insomnia because my brain was going all the time. With that being said, the irony is that when I was told in the 1990s that acute care nurse practitioners would never work in hospitals, the ironic thing is that's pretty much all I did up until 10 years ago when I left clinical cardiology because I was becoming increasingly disillusioned with writing 100 plus prescriptions a week for a lot of issues that were lifestyle mediated. I was far more interested in talking about nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, et cetera, et cetera. And I was the typical perimenopausal female. Nothing prepared me, not my mother, not my GYN, not my midwife, not my girlfriends. I hit the wall of perimenopause and hit it hard. And when I say that I was doing everything wrong, I was working out intensely. I was not getting enough sleep. I had 2 young boys. My husband traveled a lot. I was not managing my stress appropriately. And then you add in this super stressful job where in some instances you're managing, ICU patients, you're managing very medically complex patients, calling in helicopters, all sorts of stuff. And so I think for myself, my experiences and where I was in time and space no longer fit my physiology. So at 44, I took a massive leap of faith, left clinical medicine without a business plan. I don't recommend this. I always say, don't do what I did. My husband thought I was having a midlife crisis. I had to explain to him that I was not. I just was so disillusioned. And my practice was so good to me. They were like, whatever you want. You want to work 1 day a week? You want to work no weekends, no holidays? We'll make it happen. And I said, this is not about you. This is about me and the fact that I'm no longer growing. And so fairly quickly, I started attracting women just like myself, women in perimenopause and menopause who felt like their needs were not being met. I created programs. I was working one-on-one. At that time in my state, we were not allowed to practice autonomously. So I really worked within the lifestyle guidelines and referred patients back to their internists or GYNs when they needed prescriptions. And so I did that for several years. In 2018, I decided to do a TED Talk because as an introvert, it was terrifying to imagine that I would commit something to memory and get up on a stage and bring it to fruition. And so at the time that I accepted my first, I also accepted my second. Fun fact, my first talk was about perimenopause. Most people don't ever understand that. So when I say I've been in this space for 10 years, I genuinely have been. And that very first talk was done in Toronto. My second was done in South Carolina, which is where I was born. But I think the most important thing to identify here is that all the way along the way from when I transitioned from traditional allopathic medicine and started with my functional integrative training and really created my business, I was really leaning into what I was most interested in. And so from that came all these speaking opportunities, a viral TEDx, a podcast, two books. And I sit back and say, like I said to everyone at the time, I feel like I can make a bigger impact not being in an office, not being in a hospital setting. And so I think now I have proven that to be the case. But what I find so wonderful is that over the past 10 years, I've been able to speak to so many other nurse practitioners who, because of some of the work that I did, felt the confidence to be able to strike out on their own, even if it was not per se like an autonomous practice, but they want to start a podcast, they want to write a book, they want to, be a public speaker. And so I think that is really the life's work I was meant to do, that I'm an example of what NPs are capable of doing. I think that we have perhaps been an unsung hero in the healthcare space. We're 461,000 strong in the United States alone. And so I'm very proud of that. In fact, every once in a while, someone will reach out to me on social media and they'll tell me I don't talk about being a nurse enough. I'm like, are you kidding me? I was like, I'm very proud of that. I try to use it as a differentiator. So that is kind of how I've gotten to where I am. I'm married for 23 years, almost 24. I have two boys. Hard to believe. They're both adults. One is 20, one is 18, and the second one will be going off to college in August. And so I kind of sit back in my, quiet Virginia home and, sit back and just say, this is what I was meant to do. Everything I did before got me to where I am. And I always say that the adrenaline junkie side of me is kind of tucked away because my physiology no longer matches that kind of lifestyle. But I've been able to carve out for myself and to help women understand what we are capable of doing and how our physiology is really not a disadvantage at this stage. It's really, we become who we're really meant to be. We find our voices, we embrace what really resonates for us. And we do so without, those people pleasing skills that I think most of us embrace when we're younger because we want to be likable. And so I think that it has evolved into a pretty awesome place to be. That's why I always say, like, that's the great thing about middle age is that we become the individuals we were really meant to be all the way along.
Yeah, totally agree with that. We are a culmination of our experience and the lifestyle, but now that we get to help other women and families, because it trickles down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of, I hate the term mid-levels. I absolutely hate it. But I think for advanced practice nurses, physician's assistants, it's showing people what we are capable of. It's more than just writing scripts and showing up for a job. It's a lot more than that. And we're a really integral part of the healthcare system. And I'm really proud to be something different than a physician or, another role in the healthcare space. I think what we bring to the table is unique and complementary and necessary.
And I think so too. We emanate what people want to be, because I was inspired to be a nurse practitioner by a nurse practitioner. I used to go to the VA and she's a women's health nurse practitioner. And I would drive all the way. It's like a 30-minute drive from, in Alaska, everything should be like 10, 15 minutes, but I would drive my 30 minutes to see her at the VA. And then I remember I was so proud when I told her, hey, I'm in NP school. Will you be my preceptor? And she said, oh, I'm glad you're in school for this. And she said, I'm sorry, but I'm retiring. And I remember I just cried in there. I said, you're the only one that I trust here. And now you're retiring. And I was hoping so. Anyway, yeah, so she really, another nurse practitioner, inspired me to be where I am today.
That's exciting. And, it's interesting. I have an undergraduate degree in foreign affairs and I was pre-law and I applied to law school, got in, and then decided I didn't want to go to law school. And I recall, I worked 2 years for a Fortune 500 company, and then I went back and took 2 years of pre-med classes. And I was sitting in, I don't even remember what class it was. Maybe it was pharmacology for undergrads. And this professor walked up to me and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you're older than, well, not significantly. He's like, you look more mature than the other students. And so I said, well, I'm here taking pre-med classes. He's like, are you going to med school? And I said, I'm not sure what I'm doing. And he said, my sister is a nurse practitioner. I really think you should think about becoming a nurse practitioner. I was like, oh no, I don't want to be a nurse. That was my initial, because there were so many nurses in my family. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And so sure enough, I connected with her, and like literally from that point forward, I don't even remember his name now retrospectively, but from that point forward, I was like full steam ahead, wanted to do a bachelor's to master's at that time. Nurse practitioner programs, a terminal degree was a master's, not a DNP. That wasn't even an option back then. And so I, looked at at the time I was also very interested in HIV and AIDS research. And so it was either Hopkins or UCSF. And so that was an easy decision for me, and obviously the right decision for a myriad of reasons. It's amazing how sometimes you end up, I call it really truly the path less traveled. Like multiple times in my life, I have done what was unexpected of me to do. I mean, within safety. It's not like I went and joined a circus and was touring Europe or something like that. But, it was the opposite of what my parents would have wanted me to do, because they wanted the safe path to law school, get a job. And that was not the direction I ended up going. But I think for a lot of individuals, there's probably a story like that for all of us.
Yeah. Maybe we eventually find our calling, and then we're happier for it when we take that leap.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we get to the good stuff, I have 3 questions that I ask every guest. So no right answers, just a little warm up. So first one, what book are you reading right now?
Oh gosh. I have a stack of books. What is the book I'm most interested to read right now? This is a book by Dr. Tommy Wood called The Stimulated Mind. So I'm always with the podcast, I'm always reading. The other one I'm reading is Reparenting the Inner Child by Dr. Nicole LePera. So for me, you see me looking to my right. That's where I put my books that I need to read for the podcast. But those 2 books, like Nicole LePera is absolutely brilliant and has been integral in like my journey. And then Tommy Wood is a neuroscientist and he's also brilliant, but I'm interviewing them on the podcast next month. So those are my 2 books. And the other book that I'm listening to in my car, because I am an overachiever, I am listening to, it's called Replaceable You by Mary Roach. Do you know Mary Roach?
Oh, no.
She's hilarious. So she writes about human anatomy, but she does so in a funny way. And I have probably all of her books, but like they're most entertaining on Audible. So I share that as, if you are like me, I listen to books differently in the car than I do when I need to read them for the podcast. But those are my 3 right now. Sorry, I'm sorry to give you 3. You wanted 1.
Oh, that's good. I'd have to look into those. I don't know where, which one I want to start with. So my second question is, so what's the first thing you do in the morning?
If I'm being good, I don't look at my phone. I probably tongue scrape and brush my teeth. Honest to God, like it's just part of that like ritual. I get up, I get moving. I think most people empty their bladder, but probably the first thing I do is tongue scraping, which sounds a little odd, but once you start doing it, it's like this, it feels, I don't know, it feels good, but it's also like you're removing plaque from your tongue. So it's like you're removing biofilm. That probably makes me sound odd, but yeah, that's what I do in the morning.
So before you brush your teeth, you tongue scrape first?
I tongue scrape and then I brush my teeth.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So the last one, what is your favorite food?
It depends on the day. I mean, I'm going through a broccoli phase right now, which makes me sound weird. I really like tuna steak and I like bison. But I would say I'm going through a broccoli preoccupation. I don't know why. There must be something in the broccoli that I'm missing in my diet. But yeah, I would say protein wise, tuna steak, bison, and then right now I'm eating a lot of broccoli.
Wow. You're the second guest that actually said the same thing, that she's going through a broccoli phase.
I honestly think it's probably I need it for some
Mhm.
detoxification support of some kind. I was actually saying to a colleague of mine, I was like, "What is it about cruciferous vegetables?" I like go on a binge. Like sometimes it's Brussels sprouts, sometimes it's cauliflower. Right now it's broccoli.
Mhm.
It's bizarre, but yeah, I think I think when we crave certain foods, it's because we are missing a micronutrient in our diets,
Mhm. Yeah,
or we're looking for detox support, is my guess.
that's our body's way of telling us that, hey, we need this for you, for us.
Mhm. Exactly.
So, Cynthia, the reason why I wanted you, I'm really excited for you to be on the show, is that so many women in this community are navigating this exact moment in their health. So, where what used to work has stopped working, and where the answers they're getting, they don't quite match what they're experiencing, or they're being told, hey, your labs are normal, you're fine, it's part of being a woman, it's part of your age. And the menopause gut reframes that. It says that this isn't a mystery and it isn't a failure. So there's a system at work here. And when we understand that, we can work with it. So let's start at the beginning. So your book opens with a premise that shifted how I think about midlife health. That when estrogen declines, the gut microbiome becomes a central regulator of how a woman ages. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I think people are surprised to hear that statement, but I have been making this argument for over a year, and I feel quite comfortable saying that the master regulator of longevity that is not known enough about is the gut microbiome. So we're talking about 40 trillion with a T, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa that are in communication with every single organ system and cell in our bodies, full stop. There's a gut ovarian axis, a gut brain axis, a gut bone axis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And our microbiome is largely impacted by how we are born, whether we're a vaginal delivery or a C-section, whether we are breastfed or bottle fed. And we have three P's. From there, we have this, we call it the microgenderome. So, three differentiators between men and women. And the first one is puberty. Obviously, I think everyone goes through puberty if they live long enough. And not surprisingly, the male microbiome will respond to testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. And same with women. Another kind of key differentiator for the microbiome is pregnancy. If we choose to become pregnant, also a key kind of differentiator for microbiome composition. And then we also look at perimenopause. And this is where most of us are starting to notice changes. Things feel a little different in perimenopause, and that can start as early as 35. I think women are sometimes surprised. They think it's 45 and up. And I'm like, listen, 45, you're probably more than halfway through perimenopause. At least most people are. So when I talk about it being this key longevity organ, why it's a master regulator of metabolic health, endocrine health, immune health, it's because dynamically the hormones progesterone and estradiol predominantly so heavily influence digestion. They in fact influence immune function. They influence metabolic health. They influence how we age. I remind people all the time, the most mitochondrial dense organ in our bodies are our ovaries. And same thing for men, their testicles. And if you understand that we are aging from the moment we are born, we have a finite amount of eggs.
Yes.
And by the time we are, heading into 35 and up, we have declining ovarian function. It is already happening. And so I remind women that there are many factors that impact ovarian function and ovarian decline. Things like tobacco use, alcohol use, chronic stress, trauma, thinking dynamically about the cumulative net effect of not getting enough sleep, that stress factor, poor quality nutrition, lack of exercise, all these things can exacerbate and impact how quickly we lose eggs. We call it atresia, but how quickly we are losing eggs throughout this fertility cycle from puberty to perimenopause and beyond. But the thing that I think is a key kind of differentiator when we're talking about the gut microbiome is that the gut microbiome is important for how we package up and process estrogen. There's an area of the microbiome called the estrobolome. or as one of my recent podcast hosts called it, the Estrobolome, which made me chuckle. And now I talk about that every time I'm interviewed because it makes me chuckle. But this is a very important part of the microbiome where our body is able to hopefully effectively break down our estrogens. And there's two phases of detoxification in the liver, where the liver is really working to break compounds down into water soluble components. So it goes to the gut. The gut is ideally where we are packaging up things we do not need and we poop them out of the body. That's an oversimplification. But the important thing to understand is that if the microbiome is optimal, we're going to be able to do that effectively, literally packaging it up and pooping it out. However, what happens for a lot of women, due to a variety of reasons, chronic stress, exposure to toxicants, poor quality diet, antibiotics, etc., that normal distribution of elimination is impacted, and we can recirculate that estrogen. And so for women in perimenopause, we know that they have loop cycles, or they sometimes can have 20 to 30% higher levels of estrogen than in any other time of their lives. You can imagine this impacts vasomotor symptoms, sleep. It impacts joint pain, brain fog, bloating, weight loss resistance, breast tenderness. All these symptoms of estrogen excess can be magnified when the microbiome is not healthy. One of the other things that I think is really kind of key to understanding what's changing is that estrogen is a potent immune modulatory hormone, meaning estrogen's relationship with the immune system is really intertwined. We probably don't think about this until we are middle-aged, because up until that point, unlike our heart, unlike our stomach, unlike our brain, we kind of have a sense of where they are. Very different with the immune system. You probably don't even think about it unless it's not working properly. But women, as they are navigating this perimenopause to menopause transition, the gut microbiome is changing. Diversity changes, opportunistic bacteria change. Generally, they're more inflammatory. Our risk of autoimmune conditions goes up by 4 to 5 times. This is quite significant. And that has a lot to do with the small intestinal layer, which is one cell layer thick. This one cell layer thick barrier, when we are losing estrogen, think of it as brick and mortar. So brick and mortar, the mortar is the estrogen. As it's declining, you open up these tight junctions, you leak food particles into your bloodstream, you trigger an immune response. Our immune system ages right along with us. In fact, it's one of the hallmarks of aging, is that immunosenescence, which is a fancy way of saying aging of the immune system. Our immune system becomes kind of cranky. It is more reactive. We are more likely to have opportunistic infections. We have a harder time fighting specific types of infections like viruses. We are less responsive to vaccines, which is why when you go to CVS and they offer you a shingles vaccine, a pneumonia vaccine, and a flu vaccine, it's because they acknowledge you hit a certain age where you are less responsive to vaccines. You can't fight the viruses quite as effectively. Pneumonia can be from bacteria too, but
so you need a booster shot.
Yeah, exactly. I would say this is not controversial. Or it's not meant to be controversial. It's just really identifying the research. It's also why we see more allergies in women as they're getting older. It's why we see more reactivity. When women are in the setting of high estrogen, you can also see high histamine. And when histamine becomes problematic, it can lead to mast cell degranulation. And women will say, like, what just happened? I'm suddenly developing hives. I'm suddenly developing allergic reactions. That is a byproduct of this cranky, overreactive immune system. It's overreactive, and it's also not particularly, it doesn't particularly reduce inflammation. It kind of drives everything up. So I think when women say, oh, I don't need HRT, I don't want to have a conversation about it, I'm like, but you need to understand what's brewing beneath the surface. So estrogen is really important for the immune system. Digestive capacity changes. So women will sometimes say, I feel like my food sits in my stomach longer. I don't understand why that's happening. Well, progesterone is a smooth muscle relaxant. Mm-hmm. And so as you are losing progesterone, you may have more reflux. You may have changes in digestive capacity. Also, with estrogen declining, you may see alterations in nitric oxide production. So you might not get as much movement through the digestive system. And that is a byproduct of these changes. You also get changes in short chain fatty acid production. So women will sometimes say, I don't want to eat fiber. Fiber makes me bloated. Fiber's no good. And I'm here to tell you, fiber is your friend. Yes. And along with protein, you need to increase your fiber intake because your short chain fatty acid production declines. Why are these important? Because they're anti-inflammatory. They are also integral in helping create mucus for the digestive system. some of them actually cross the blood-brain barrier. So they're signaling molecules like butyrate. And I think for a lot of women, they don't understand that in the setting of no fiber, your body will be forced to putrefy protein. In the absence, it will try to ferment the protein. But let me back up and mention fiber, when we consume it, goes to the large intestine or colon, which is where the microbiome, the gut microbiome is. And there the colonocytes ferment the fiber. And that's how it's almost like they ferment the fiber, and out of that comes these short chain fatty acids. So we have to work a little bit more diligently to support these very important signaling molecules. And here's the thing, like I just did a 3-part series, like it's called the Midlife Minute. So on Thursdays, I do short podcasts, like sometimes they're 8 minutes long. I'm not kidding. Sometimes they're 20 or 30, but it's always on a theme. And I've been talking about how you can get more fiber into your lifestyle without all the bloating and side effects, because more often than not, when a woman tells me she's fiber intolerant, it's not that she's intolerant. She's either increasing it too quickly, it's the wrong type of fiber. You know, what is it? There's like fiber bars. I had a patient tell me recently, instead of like eating more vegetables or having some legumes or beans, she was like, I'm just going to take this fiber bar. And she said, but it bloats me so much because it's full of inulin. And so I was having a conversation. I said, I bet if you just had some, you know, maybe you had a 1/4 cup of legumes or beans, or you just added some flax and chia to a smoothie, you would actually get the fiber that you need without the bloat from inulin or chicory root. I think might have been the other one that she was talking about. And so I was trying to explain to her that, you know, first we track and then we slowly increase things. So if you're currently eating 5 to 10, which is what the standard American diet tends to be, we don't suddenly try to get to 30. Like that would, your microbes need time to acclimate. Just like you're climbing a mountain, you don't ascend the mountain all at once. You kind of do it gradually. And so we want to think of fiber the same way.
I want to bring up the role of fiber too with excess estrogen, because we need those fibers, especially cruciferous vegetables, to excrete all those circulating estrogen, right?
It's helped. So when we talk about that packaging up and pooping out of the body, I was on a podcast, this will make you chuckle, and someone said, don't say defecate or don't say excrement, just call it poop. So I was like, all right, this is a new thing for me. But yeah, it's important. Like fiber has a lot of health benefits. And I think for a lot of individuals, they've just been convinced that we need, you know, psyllium husk and Metamucil. And I'm like, listen, get it first. And if you need to supplement beyond that, that's fine. But I think we tend to overcomplicate things.
Yeah, a lot of my patients too are asking me, so like, is there something you can give me if I could? Some of them, they listen to a lot of podcasts and read books, and they come and they're like, well, I heard from this podcast and I think I'm estrogen dominant. So what can I do to get rid of my estrogen? And of course, if they're still cycling, they tell me, oh, it happens, you know, right before my period. I was like, okay, that's your evidence. So, and I just tell them, and they're so just like shocked that I just tell them, just up your fiber a few days before your period, and that will help you get rid of like that recirculating estrogen in your system.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like fresh ground flax seeds and chia seeds put together, because if anyone that's listening is familiar with Bristol's stool chart, I talk all the time about, you know, gold standard is a 4. That will give you those gold standard poops. So, you know, just helping people understand there's a lot of different things that we can do that don't necessarily mean that we have to resort to grandma's Metamucil. I just keep harping on that because I recall both my grandmothers drank that gelatinous yellow. I don't know how they even drank it, to be honest with you. I'm like, I can't, that must have been so unpleasant.
Yeah, it tastes like chalk. So many women describe this experience. So they used to eat a certain way, exercise a certain way, and their body responds, but now it's all different. So something shifts and nothing works the same. So what's happening physiologically in this transition?
Well, you're probably talking about women who become weight loss resistant, because all the things change. So from a very basic level, we are losing insulin sensitivity as we are losing muscle mass. And we know after the age of 40 that sarcopenia is a real thing, anywhere from 4 to 8% muscle mass loss per decade. So this becomes a cumulative, significant effect. This is why we really need to be emphasizing to our younger women to be building muscle and bone at younger ages. So number one, we are losing insulin sensitivity as we are losing muscle mass. So it becomes critically important to not only have a sense of our bioimpedance reading. So we're talking about fat-free mass to muscle mass. You step on a scale, all you get is, you don't get a differentiator between
Yeah.
your lean mass and your fat mass. You don't. You just get a number, which is not particularly helpful. So
Mhm.
bioimpedance reading, get a baseline. Loss of insulin sensitivity goes right along with the loss of muscle mass, as does alterations in estrogen. So we know that what really depicts the beginning of perimenopause is a decline in progesterone. It's important to also understand that depending on where you are in your cycle, you may have higher or lower estradiol levels. Typically, we know that we have this relative estrogen dominance that you were kind of alluding to with your patient saying, I think I have estrogen dominance. Well, it's all relative. It's all about a symphony
Yes.
between these hormones. But
Mhm.
it's helpful for women to know that as estrogen is declining, we are also losing insulin sensitivity. This is really, really key because not often enough do we talk about this. I think we use the context and the lens of menopause. I'm like, this is happening in perimenopause. The other things that start to happen, you're not sleeping enough. You're not getting high quality enough sleep. Like women think they can get by with 4 to 5 hours of sleep. That is a recipe for metabolic disaster. It is absolutely imperative. There's a very small subsect of the population that has the genetics that they can get away with 4 to 5 hours a night of sleep sustained, but that is not most people. We're also becoming less stress resilient. I think this is really important for people to understand, especially because a lot of women head into perimenopause and suddenly they're dealing with anxiety and depression they've never experienced before, along with the insomnia that we will oftentimes see when we have a decrease in progesterone secretion as well as changes in GABA. GABA is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. And this is why I'm such a fan of replacement of progesterone because we get this wonderful metabolite called allopregnanolone, which has a sedating
Yeah.
effect. So decline in hormones, changes in sleep quality, which for many women, we start seeing alterations in deep and REM sleep that is exacerbated by lifestyle choices, which we'll get to in a second, less stress resilience. We get to nutrition. Nutrition is about the biggest lever we have. What I find is most women have been under eating protein for years. They have been eating the wrong types of carbohydrates for years. And by that, I mean the processed variety. I'm not all about vilifying carbohydrates. In fact, I talk about how I think they're incredibly important for the right reasons. The relationship with alcohol has to change. Alcohol will become a huge issue with sleep, metabolic health. For a lot of women, it has become their go-to for not dealing with uncomfortable feelings because it's more socially acceptable than illicit drugs or some other bad habits that are out there. I think a great deal about meal frequency. So, how frequently are people eating? I know when I was first a nurse practitioner in 2001, you better believe I was telling people to eat frequently and have snacks and mini meals. So I was telling my patients to eat like 6 times a day, which is about the worst advice in the world, but that's what we were taught. And
Yeah.
so meal frequency, whether someone intermittent fasts or not, we need at least 12 to 13 hours of digestive rest. We eat too frequently, we eat too much. I would say the other piece is ultra processed foods. And when we talk about ultra processed foods, we're really speaking to foods that are high in salt, sugar, and fat, the wrong types. Sugar is a huge problem. Most of my patients, I encourage them to go gluten free. For many of them, they need to go dairy free as well. And remember, as I started off the conversation earlier, that if we have leaky gut, we're going to leak food particles into our bloodstream. We're going to provoke an immune response. So many, many women are no longer tolerant of some of these inflammatory foods. And then we move on to exercise. I am of the generation where we were told that we needed to be skinny and we need to do a lot of long form cardio. That is, again, about the worst advice we could ever give anyone. What you need to do is strength train, maintain muscle, build muscle, and you need to be mindful at this stage of life that zone 2 cardio is great. So I have hills. It's a very hilly part of my state. I can walk up and down the hills. I can have a comfortable conversation. Movement becomes important. Recovery becomes even more important. More often than not, when I'm talking to patients, I'm telling them to do less because they've been doing so much for so long. Because the mindset is if I exercise more and eat less, I'm going to lose weight. That does not happen in perimenopause and menopause. So multiple factors that will impact weight loss resistance, not the least of which gut health, because most of us do not have a healthy gut heading into middle age. And the last thing that I think is significant to mention is the role of trauma. I do spend quite a bit of time in the book unpacking adverse childhood events, really speaking to the research in this area and how, depending on your personal circumstances, and I trained in inner city Baltimore, so I knew big T trauma well, rape, murder, suicide. It's the seemingly innocuous, not benign subtlety of little t trauma, addiction, abuse, neglect. Those types of things can imprint children and will change the way that their nervous system adapts and grows. And so these women in particular, I am one of them. I have a very high ACE score. I talk very openly about this. My nervous system was regulated differently than the average person. So I tended to run with high cortisol. I was sympathetic dominant. A lot of these women end up being very high achieving individuals. They manage through their teens, 20s, and 30s when their hormones are optimal. And then in perimenopause, it is the litmus test. This is when women will find that they start to struggle a whole lot more. And so I share this as when women come to me and they say, I'm doing all the right things, nothing's working. And they're saying, I'm sleeping, I'm managing my stress, I eat really well, I lift a couple days a week. I think my gut's okay, but I don't know for certain. But then they tell me about their trauma history. I'm like, this is probably an underlying issue. The last thing that I'll add is, body composition changes are not just about estrogen and progesterone. They are also about testosterone. Testosterone, I think lowering levels of testosterone as most women as they navigate that transitional time, testosterone impacts body composition quite significantly. And I think for a lot of individuals, it's like acknowledging that women, number one, that we make 1/10 of the testosterone, but it's incredibly potent in our bodies, and why it needs to be part of the conversation for most women. About 25% of women still make sufficient amounts of testosterone in menopause, but most of us do not. And sometimes that's the missing link. But I typically am not recommending testosterone until we've optimized progesterone as well as estrogen. And I know that's controversial because I see plenty of women that they're just put on testosterone when they're in perimenopause. And I'm like, that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I've also seen perimenopause women still like having really heavy cycles and then just put on estrogen, no progesterone, and they have a uterus.
Remember we talked about the symphony. That's why it's so important. I mean, do I think women should start with progesterone? In most instances, I think that's really beneficial. I think the other piece of it is now that the GLP-1s are so popular, all of the research definitely demonstrates that a GLP-1 plus HRT is probably going to yield the best body composition changes. And let me be clear, we still have to do the lifestyle stuff.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of women, that has been a total game changer for body composition changes. I didn't have that option 10 years ago, but I think a lot of women now are feeling like that's the icing on the cake. Maybe the peptides are the icing on the cake as they're making that transition. And maybe they're doing all the right things. They've dialed in on everything and still struggling. I think GLP-1s can sometimes be, the last little piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, you mentioned insulin before, and I'm glad that you give this holistic view of like, hey, our hormones are a symphony. Let's not just blame estrogen. Let's not just blame testosterone, but you mentioned insulin, because I have also seen, I'm one of the few people that like insulin, or fasting insulin is one of my go-to.
Yep.
And I check that, and my patients actually, I tell them like, you're insulin resistant. They're like, well, how can that be? I'm not diabetic, but it's not about being diabetic. And I have to be careful with my language, because I'm like, I've said before that, well, you're going to be diabetic if you don't like change this, and they don't like that. So I just say, to avoid diabetes someday, we have to address your insulin right now. And right now, because like I've seen insulin like 99, 109, but then the A1C is like 5.1.
Yeah. Well, and I think here's the thing. I think of it as the canary in the coal mine. It's the 5 to 10 years before you are ever diagnosed with diabetes. And given the fact that 92 to 93% of Americans are not metabolically healthy, most people listening to this podcast are unknowingly probably already in that kind of pre-diabetic range. And so I think that a fasting insulin, and I've been saying this for 10 years, and I was told 10 years ago I was crazy. I'm glad to know that it's now becoming more the norm. It is the first biomarker that will dysregulate in response to changes in metabolic health. If you are a woman who had gestational diabetes, if you are a woman that had preeclampsia, if you're a woman that had PCOS, you're already knocking on the door of poor metabolic health. So, to me, really important that we are much more proactive. I think I say we as a nation of clinicians, in many ways, we don't do a great job identifying these patients earlier. And by then, the damage is done. I mean, what people don't understand is When your fasting glucose or your postprandial glucose is greater than 140, you're already damaging the interior lining of your blood vessels. Full
Mhm.
stop. I think people need to hear that. And it seems a little bit harsh, but I'm like, it is not normal to have a blood sugar of 200. It should never be acceptable. I don't even like to see blood sugars of 140. I'll tell people you're already damaging the delicate line, the endothelial lining. You are already damaging it by having a blood sugar that high. Now, someone will say, well, you're no fun. What do you mean when it's my birthday or I want to have a special event? I'm like, there are so many ways to buffer the effects of a processed sugar load. I mean, have the steak, have the broccoli, don't have the alcohol, don't have the crappy appetizer, and then have your cake. I mean, if it's your birthday or it's a special event, then enjoy it, but don't sit down and mow through a bunch of chips and a pizza and then eat the cake. I mean, you're asking for trouble for sure.
Yeah, I like how you said that. It's the buffer. There's so many ways, like you
Fiber
layer your
buffers.
food. Yep, exactly. You like layer with protein and fiber first, and then you eat what you want, but then you increase your activity, and then
Yeah.
you make sure that you sleep good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, they probably don't know that movement, we have GLUT4 transporters in our muscles. It's like a glucose sink. It's one of the best ways that you can manage your blood glucose is to go for a walk. I used to make fun of these couples that did this, and now I think they're brilliant. But in my neighborhood in Northern Virginia, we had a lot of couples that would walk after meals. And I'm like, that is absolutely brilliant. That is exactly what we should be doing. Because even a 10-minute walk, if you're wearing a CGM or even checking with a glucometer, the net impact on your blood sugar is significant. So we should not be eating meals and then sitting on our bums till we go to bed.
Yeah, I agree. So yes, now you talk about CGM. So a lot of women here we're high achievers, nurses, nurse practitioners, most of us, our second career
Mhm.
until we find our calling. Continuous glucose monitor, I think it's a really effective preventative tool, and I wish insurance would just go ahead and cover it. If it's not, a lot of women listening, they're accessible nowadays and gives us really good information. Especially, I don't think we talked about cortisol, the chronic stress that we
Mhm.
experience nowadays. Just the CGM can really give us that biofeedback. An example that I have is I had a house guest, and I say this all the time when I go on podcast. I work out, I eat healthy, blood sugar is still high. The moment I drove that guest to the airport, I scanned myself, blood sugar is low.
Oh, and maybe you shouldn't have that guest back again.
Yeah, yeah, not happening, not as often.
I mean, I think CGMs are incredibly insightful. I jokingly talk about my blood glucose variability is great until I travel because I'm the type of person. I'm very type A. I like to be at the airport early. I like to be I don't want to be running between gates. And that happens to me more frequently than I care to deal with. And I shout out to O'Hare Airport because that's my least favorite airport. I know the people in Chicago are lovely. I'm just saying your airport is the pits. I get stuck there a lot, which is why I don't fly through there anymore. But when I look at what ticks off my glucose and my excursions, it is the stress of travel when I'm by myself. It is without question. But I think for a lot of individuals, I think CGMs can be incredibly insightful, not only for just day-to-day stress, but also getting a sense of what foods provide
Yes.
provocation of blood glucose. For me, I talk very openly about plantains. I like plantains. They do not like me. It does not matter what I eat them with. It does not matter at all. So I think for a lot of individuals, it can be very insightful. And then people can make better choices. I think the other piece of that is, if you can't afford a CGM, checking your blood sugar with a glucometer can also be very, very helpful. And the other thing I would add is it's helpful for people to know that when cortisol goes up, correspondingly glucose goes up. And cortisol, in the case of, I'm sure if you measure my cortisol right now, I'm engaged in this conversation. It's probably up. I'm awake. I'm alert, obviously. That's different than chronic stress. And chronic stress
Mhm.
can be catabolic. It breaks down your muscle. It lowers your immunity. So you're more susceptible to opportunistic infections. It'll lead to leaky gut. It becomes this domino effect. And it's helpful for people to know that when your glucose goes up, if your cortisol goes up, your glucose goes up, your insulin goes up, guess what? Fat storage. You are not going to be able to access stored fat as a fuel source. So that metabolic health piece, it becomes this when women are talking about how, they think they manage their stress with 5 minutes of meditation once a week. I'm like, it is far more than that. You actually have to find something you like and do it often. And that might be different for all of us, but I'm a huge fan of finding things that you can do. Like for me, I'm a big box breather because I can do that anywhere and no one has to know what I'm doing. Whereas stimulating the vagus nerve, if I'm humming or singing or gargling, obviously I make noise. I might not want to, bring attention to myself. But I think for a lot of individuals, it's finding that stress management really is the key. That is the missing link for so many of us.
Yeah, and it's good that you found what works for you and you can do it anywhere. And you don't have to, because sometimes I think it's more stressful when people think, okay, I need to set time to relax. But like the way to get there is like the stress of clearing up your schedule and everything just to find time to relax is stressful in itself.
Oh, absolutely. I think for a lot of people, it's definitely, it feels like it's the domino effect, like just one more thing. I'm like, no, we're not looking to add things that are stressful. It's like, what are the things you're drawn to doing, like connection to nature, grounding work? It's finally warm enough where we are that if I took my shoes off and stood in the grass, I wouldn't look like a weirdo. But I think for a lot of people, it's find the things you like doing and do them often. And you do that way before you think about a gadget. Like we are a gadget centric culture. We want the supplement, not changing our diet. We want the gadget before we change anything about lifestyle. And I'm like, the gadgets come later. Like
Yeah.
you really have to master the basic stuff before you can layer other things in.
Yeah, gadgets are tools. It's not like our ultimate go-to.
Exactly.
Um, Speaking of like old school, not gadget, I'm doing this training certification right now. It's Creighton and Napro technology. So it's checking cervical mucus as biomarkers. And so we have a physical chart and we actually use stickers. And so the role of stress you can see on the chart, it's amazing because you can see that women like either they ovulate early, they ovulate late, and certain types of mucus appear at a certain time, and it's correlated to stress. And sometimes they actually even double peak.
Wow. So cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, for a woman listening right now who recognizes herself in this conversation, what do you suggest she actually start?
Yeah. I mean, I think you start with the basics. And by that I mean, if you're trying, let's give an example. You're trying to support digestion. In my family, we used to say grace before we sat down and ate a meal. And taking 4 to 5 deep breaths before you eat a meal is a great way to put your body into a parasympathetic state. I know we didn't talk about the autonomic nervous system, but helpful for people to know that we want the sympathetic, like we're being chased by a rabid animal. It's fight, flight, flee, or fawn versus rest and repose, which is the parasympathetic, which is when your body can digest, assimilate, absorb, and detoxify. And literally, when you're standing up and eating or yelling at your kids or eating off their plates, that's not optimal. So, get 4 to 5 deep breaths before you eat. Walk for 5 or 10 minutes after a meal. Go to bed 30 minutes earlier. Like we are starting that basic because in the book, we start at a very basic level and then work our ways up to more advanced protocols. All the things that I've done with patients over the last 10 plus years are included in the book. But I will always say major in the majors. Like don't get caught up in, oh, I need the latest gadget that's out there. Those things are fun. But actually you need to get really acquainted with the basic stuff so that you have mastered that before you move on to more complicated and frankly expensive stuff.
Yeah, so foundations, right?
Yep.
So I want to ask you something that I think our audience, I'm sure they'll appreciate. So you've built your career around helping women understand their bodies. So what do you want women to know, not just clinically, but personally about this season of life?
You have to change your lifestyle to match your new physiology. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. And I'm not saying this as a clinician, I'm saying this human to human. And as someone that was probably arguably doing all the wrong things when I was entering perimenopause, the women that are doing the best are the ones that accept the pause. So when we talk about the pause, perimenopause, middle pause, which I coined in the book because I got tired of saying perimenopause and menopause so many times.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity, it's a litmus test to really reflect on what is working for you in your life and what is not.
Thank you for that. So now we get to your book. So tell us about the Menopause Gut. So what's your intention in writing it and who is it for?
Oh gosh, it's for any woman north of 35 or the people that love her. I'll be honest, partners, loved ones, sisters, brothers, friends. It's really a love letter to women. It's the book I wish I had had 10 plus years ago. It really explores ovarian aging, It explores the immune system. It talks about bone health. We talk about hormones. We unpack the Women's Health Initiative. We talk about HRT. We talk about supplements. We talk about nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress management. We unpack trauma, which I think is really significant. And, all the research, there's so much research in this book that it would have added 20 pages to the book. So it'll all be housed on my website. And then we have recipes, like actually recipes you're going to want to make that really center around the foundations around ferments, fiber, and protein. And to me, it really is, it is a groundbreaking book because no one else is really focused on this. The changes that happen in perimenopause and menopause are incredibly unique vis-a-vis the gut microbiome, which really intersects with all these other organ systems and body systems in a way that's really novel and unique. And I think we will eventually see a clinical indication for HRT use and gut microbiome health. That is my prediction.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm glad that it's coming from you because you've lived it, you have the experience, and you have the research. So I'm glad that you wrote this book. And Cynthia, this has been such a gift. Thank you for the clarity and the depth and the kindness that you bring to this work. I know our audience is going to walk away from this differently when they had arrived. For everyone watching and listening, if you want to go deeper with Cynthia's work, her new book is The Menopause Gut. And you can find her at Cynthia Thurlow. I did put a QR code. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to scan that. It'll take you straight to her website. Or also you can find her in cynthiathurlow.com, and her podcast is Everyday Wellness, available wherever you listen. So Cynthia, thank you so much again. It's an honor to share this space with you. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
No, thank you so much. It's been such an honor connecting with you and knowing that you're doing great work in Alaska. Thank you for what you do as well to support women.
You're welcome. To everyone here, if this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe, share the episode with a woman in your life who needs it, and leave a comment below. And if I want to hear from you. So what was one big thing today that made something click? Not made you click, made something click. And remember, caring for your health is not vanity, it's stewardship. When we understand our bodies, when we show up more fully for our families, our vocations, let me rephrase that. So remember, caring for your health is not vanity, it is stewardship. When we understand our bodies, we show up more fully for our families, our vocations, and the people entrusted to us. Until next time, stay rooted in faith, intentional with your food, and aligned in function. And I'll see you in the next episode.